So, in talking about ballot access, this is a long and sordid struggle, and such a righteous one, and it's one that unites a lot of other parties too. Give us, in Maryland terms, and maybe terms that will make sense in other parts of the country, the concise version of the story of third party struggles to get on the ballot, to stay on the ballot, which is as harder than getting on the ballot. Uh, what do you have to do, and what is it? What is the road ahead?
Okay, so the concise version of the story is that the way that we do elections and political parties right now is not the way that it had always been. In the 19th century, there were oftentimes multiple parties in any given election, and we had an American history that was always been a multiple party democracy up until about the 1900s. At about the 1900s, or around abouts there, states started to regulate the ballot. And as states started to regulate the ballot, they determined who showed up on it, how voters could vote. A bunch of progressive era reforms and a bunch of other reforms started to say we need more focus on regulations. So when the states started regulating the ballot, they had to start deciding who got access to the ballot. And that meant which candidates could appear on it, which parties could place people on it, and how citizen referendums and questions were added to it. Initially, there were several ways of determining that. One was the number of petitions that somebody could collect, or number of signatures on a petition, always been a part of the method. Another part of it is vote tests and voter registration tests. So if you run a candidate and they get X% of the vote, then your party gets ballot access. If you have voter registration and X number of voters are registered with your party gets ballot access. The third way that it happens is money. And even still today, some states are just like, just pay us the money and you can get on the ballot. And so what happened is as states started to take control of ballots, state governments started to make regulations on ballots. And what they did is they slowly increased each of those things we talked about. They increased the threshold of the number of votes that you needed. They increased the threshold of the number of signatures that you needed. And that, created a process that made it harder and harder for small parties, independents, and issues to get on the ballot. Today, in Maryland, we have to get 10,000 signatures on paper, 10,000 ink signatures on paper every 4 years if we don't get 1% in the governor's race. And Maryland's not a terrible state. There's a lot of states that are way worse than Maryland, but it's a pretty big burden. And what ends up happening about that is, even though it is useful to go have conversations with people in Essex about the Green Party being on the ballot, it would be a much better use of our time to go to Essex and have conversations with people about what they need, what they want out of a political party, what they want out of their political candidates. And so because we're focused on doing all of this paperwork and this sort of petitioning process and things like that, it distracts parties from being able to run candidates, from being able to build infrastructure and things like that. And it's a real challenge because people in the two parties don't ever have to worry about ballot access. Their parties are guaranteed to be on the ballot. And for smaller parties, it is the sort of life and death issue. And so I don't know. That's a lot. I hope that was concise enough. It probably wasn't that concise.
No, honestly, it wasn't very concise, but it did outline that a party has to burn so many resources or go through so many resources to get to that point where the parties that have the resources don't have to burn even those resources to stay there. And so I think that is, it's such a catch-22 situation, and there's so many circular, kind of arguments that institutions make about excluding and it really is, we're not letting you, in because we're not letting you in. And so that ties to then in Maryland the process of ballot access that you are getting signatures on and getting people to commit to now.
Yep. And so right now we are going out and pretty much every weekend in Maryland and getting people to sign petitions and again sign pieces of paper with ink. And I don't know if we'll talk about it today or not, but we can talk about modernizing that process as well at some point because there's a lot of work that we've done to make it so that electronic signatures are possible. At the end of the day, it is the struggle to determine which choices voters have. And the two parties are very eager to restrict the choices that voters have. They don't want voters to have independent candidates outside of the two parties. They don't want to have parties outside of the two parties. And they don't want to have charter amendments or citizen-driven initiatives that allow people other than them to make the laws and legislate. So they do a lot of things in order to restrict it and make it difficult in order for those choices to show up on the ballot. And courts agree with them. For the most part, since the 1950s, courts have been very consistent in their agreement that states have the ability to regulate this, even if it is, even if it is anti-democratic.
Right. And one thing that people can do right now, if you've just joined us or you're joining us, is you can open a new window and go right to gogreen2026.com.